Oh, hi. This week's video is titled Too Much Development. Now, that's a question, not a statement. So let's try to answer that question. Developers are building a lot of apartments right now. Over the 2012 to 2017 period, developers expect to open about 48,000 units in King Pierce and Snohomish County. That's more than double the production in the last building boom in the late 1990s. You have to go back to the late 1980s to see more development activity. So that is a lot of product, but what does it really mean for the market? Well, you have to look at some other factors. For one thing, property managers have this very unusual requirement. They really expect tenants to have jobs so they can afford to pay rent. So it's useful to look at job trends. If you look at what Conway Peterson is forecasting for job growth over the 2012 to 2017 period, you could see that it's significant, but it's not as strong a job growth as we had in the late 1990s, and it's not nearly as strong as the job growth that we had in the late 1980s. So certainly compared to the last building boom in the late 1990s, when you look at these job growth trends, we're building twice as many units, but we don't have as much job growth. That suggests that maybe developers are building too much. But let's actually take a detailed look at the numbers. So yes, we're looking at significant job growth now, but less than the last boom, twice as many new units. That indicates that we're going to be out of balance between supply and demand. But if you look at the previous boom in the late 1980s, you can see that job growth was much stronger, but also apartment production was much higher. And so actually, it was kind of proportionate to what we're looking at now. So based on the late 1980s boom, our current building boom seems to be pretty much in sync with that, the relationship between jobs and apartment development, and out of sync with the last boom. So why did those two booms behave so differently? Well, one reason is demographics. If you look at what happened to population changes for people in the 20 to 34 age group in our region, you could see that in the late 1980s, we had a growth in that group. And that's important because 20 to 34-year-olds are predominantly renters. Some are going to go buy homes and condos, but they're predominantly renters. Now you get into the mid to late 1990s and you actually saw that age group shrink. So we had the late 80s, we had the tail end of the baby boom population consuming rental housing. In the mid to late 1990s, we had Gen X in the market. The Gen X as a total population group nationwide was about half the size of the baby boom population. So that explains the drop in that period of time. Now we have the Gen Y age group coming into the market over the last few years and into the next few years with a tremendous surge. So the increases of predominantly renter population groups is a major factor as to why these two booms behave differently. But here's another one. We call this the geyser effect. We look at how many people turn 65 in our region each year, and the idea behind that is that's sort of a placeholder for suggesting that these people are going to start retiring out of the workforce, making room for younger workers. You saw an increase in that age group in the late 1980s, a decrease in the late 1990s, and a very significant increase now as a result of all the baby boomers moving into their 60s and into retirement age. Now, it doesn't mean that we're all going to retire when we're 65. I'm sure that won't happen, but you look at this very dramatic change in the number of people turning 65 each year, and you can see that it's clearly going to lead to a change in the composition of the workforce. It's going to become a younger workforce. So as 65-year-olds retire out of the workforce, and 65-year-olds are going to be predominantly homeowners rather than renters, that makes room for 20-somethings to come into the workforce. So the changing makeup of the workforce just makes the job growth numbers, while still important, less important than when you look at the demographic shifts within those job numbers. So I hope that you enjoyed this week's video and you'll come back next week for another weekly apartment update.